Greetings everybody and welcome back to the Vintage Sewing Machine Garage. You are once again looking at the Imperial heavy-duty all-metal Japanese-made sewing machine. These are often referred to as clones because they are based on the original Singer Class 15 drivetrain, but with many changes and upgrades, particularly in the zigzag area. So, you are looking at the machine. The machine has already been completed, but there was one thing that I forgot that I had to go as I was finishing it up. I made the video, and every time I get ready to list a machine for sale, I go over, I save the polishing and the cleaning of the body for last. That's sort of the last little thing that I do before it's ready. And I had cleaned it for the debut video, I guess. But I had actually not finished something, and it escaped me. And as I was going over my inspection, I saw something, and there's a reason you see a guitar pick, and you see the presser foot off the machine. Well, there was a piece of tape right here, and it was some sort of clear, Scotch tape type product, and it had been on there a while. Why do people do this? Well, it's understandable why you sometimes, more often than I care to think about, you see tape on the bed of the machine, and it's usually right in this area right here. And why is that? Because people wanted to be able to reliably tell where their seams were. You have seam allowances you need to take into account when you're sewing, and in order to do that, you need to know where you are and to sort of keep things on the straight and narrow. Now, back in the day, you had a couple of options. If you were fortunate and you had, say here's a Singer 301, I'm holding it with my other hand here. You can see that the seam guide is embossed into the plate, into the needle plate. And you think, well, that's great. And I sometimes see this on other machines. I sometimes see it on, first of all, the 400 and 500 series. After the 301, Singer started doing this more and more with its machines, and a number of the Japanese-made machines like this one would do it, but not all of them did. And if they did not, well, you had to figure something out. And, of course, people would essentially, they would go in and they would start marking. They would measure off with their tape measure, and they put masking tape or some kind of tape on there to hold something down so that they could remember where the seam measurements should be when they're sewing, which makes sense why they needed it. Unfortunately, it is a really big pain to get off, because the tape I had to pull off, it was not new. It wasn't fresh. I couldn't just get the edge and pull it right up. No. Oh no, it had been on there a while, and that tape was made of plastic. It had started to degrade, and so it came off bit by bit by bit, and the glue stuck really well, thus this. Now it turns out that a guitar pick, especially a nice thin flexible one, yes, there are lots of different types, as I learned. No, I do not play the guitar, but I know people that do. And as it turns out, this one is very thin and flexible, and it's not unlike, say, your thumbnail, which I also use. So the pick and my thumbnail, I spent an hour and 15 minutes to get this tape off. I could have tried to use a chemical. No, I started doing this, and then I let it sit overnight with some just sewing machine oil, hoping that would loosen up some of the glue. It didn't work all that great, so back I went. Talk about being the Karate Kid. I felt like it, but I did not want to ruin this nice, lovely, glossy finish. And I didn't want to put any scratches in it by just trying to, strong arm the tape off. So it is now off. It is gorgeous and beautiful. But back to the original cause of the problem. Again, sewing machine companies eventually started to emboss their needle plate, which is what this is, with seam measurements, seam dimensions. But this one doesn't have it. And if you have a machine, and many of the vintage machines do not, what do? Well, I remembered that I had purchased some years ago at Sew Classic, which is that wonderful sewing machine supplier that is no longer in business, and I got these little decals. You might pronounce it decals, whatever, tomato, tomato, however you say it. Now, it looks white, but it's actually just a white background. This part is clear. And if you look at it, it's got different seam allowances, and this little spot here is how you line this up on the plate. This is where the needle would go in. So basically, we're going to do that today, and I'm going to show you how I go about it, if I can manage to do it without fumbling it or dropping the camera. You never know. So anyway, we're going to do this, and then some of you may be wondering, well, where can I get some of these? I don't know. I haven't looked for them. It takes me a long time because they came in a pack. I mean, they came in this envelope, and I had a bunch of them. So I still have enough, and so I'm going to put this in. It should not take very much. One thing to remember, if you have a straight stitch machine, this is really not an issue, but if you have a zigzag capable machine like I've got right here, make sure that your needle is centered, okay? Make sure that it is centered, because otherwise it'll throw off your seam allowance. So, what are we going to do? And this is the reason I took the presser foot off, just to give us some room here, some working room, so we can see what we're doing. So, I'm going to pull up my needle, try not to, hopefully not tangle up all my threads here, because otherwise I'll need to rethread the machine. But I'm going to go in here, and you can see where the needle comes down. This is where it wants to come down at. So we're just going to line the little dark marking here with the needle. And we know where the hole is because it's right underneath the needle. So we're going to put it right there. Okay. Now I've got my hole marking. So what else am I going to do? I don't want this on top of the feed dog, obviously. So, but I know how to align it now. I've got the hole, right? So I know where the needle alignment needs to be. I'm going to take this. It's fairly wide, actually, and you can see it now. It's sort of like, ironically, it sort of looks like Scotch tape. So what am I doing with this? I'm holding it just to get it. Let's zoom in a little bit more. I don't know how easily this is going to show up. I want you to have a good view, especially if I screw this up. So we're going to line this up with where the needle is, so we know how far to come down, right? Come over just a tad more so that my line is not going too far. And yep, I'm just fine with my needle, with my alignment here. Okay, so now what am I going to do? I've got feed dogs here. Well, if you notice, this number 2, let's pull this back up so you can see a little bit better. I think I may have solved this issue and made it more complicated than it should have been. You can see where I punctured this with the needle. There it is right there by my thumb. And notice that where it shows the number 2, that lines up perfectly with the edge of the needle plate and where the feed dog is. So, if you want to do this in an easier way than I just tried, I will show it to you. I'm going to put that one back for a moment. Now, I put this back on the paper backing just so I could have enough. It needs to be somewhere where I don't totally ruin the glue with my fingers. So what am I doing now? I'm going to cut. Just like that. It's already cut on the on 2 sides. And then I'm going to come over here and cut again. And you could do this with a straight edge and an X-Acto if you really wanted to. But now, notice what I've done. I've cut. I already know that the 2 lines up with the edge here. I wanted to be sure, because sewing machines may vary a bit. I don't know. But, of course, I did test it with the needle. So we know that when the needle is in this hole, this number 2, this first line, comes right up to the edge of where the plate opens up for the feed dog. So that's perfect. So now, all I need to do is take this and peel it off, and what I should have is basically this little square here. And I don't know, other than watching paint dry or grass grow, if there's anything more exciting than watching someone try to peel a decal backing off, ironically. All right, let's try. Here we go. There we go. So I've got it from that side. Here we go. Haha. Now, I've got it in my fingers. I'm trying not to over touch it because I don't want to lose the tackiness of the glue. Make sure this is clean. You don't want any oil on this, because you want this piece to stick. I'm going to zoom in even a little bit better. Hopefully that helps. And if I can stay out of my own way here. And again, it's not so much, as long as you get it within the range, I want to try to center it as best I can. And the reason for that is I want everything to line up here. But as long as I'm, laterally, left to right, as long as I'm lined up, I should be okay. So we're going to put this here, just like that. It's mostly centered. Don't go over the edge or you're going to interfere with your feed dog moving. Now, you might think, well, that's just a piece of tape. Well, the first thing to notice is it is not sitting on the painted portion, right? So I've actually come over here and I want to push down nice and make sure it's nice and it doesn't make any weird noises, so it's not scraping off. The feed dog is not hitting it. That's definitely something you don't want to do, and there's probably a reason why they send you so many of these. If you screw one up, you can start over. Okay, now I've got a little bit here hanging right up here, and I can take if I can find it, my X-Acto knife, and I will simply shave that off. It's not, again, it's not a big deal. And when I do, now I have a seam guide, right? And everything can flow right over it. It won't be harming the paint. It looks better than tape. And again, I would much rather clean something off of this polished metal than the paint if I had to. And if you are an owner of an X-Acto set, then you also know, some of you who sew might even have straight razors. But of course, X-Acto knives are like having a razor blade knife, and they are extremely sharp. So be smart when you're using yours. And I try to remind myself to do the same. Now the other thing you can do is, if you don't want to cut it, I just wanted to cut mine, you can also, there's a gap here. So it didn't take much to get that. Let me zoom in further so you can see what it looks like now. I may have folded it down. I attempted to cut it. I don't think my scissors will get that low. There, I think I've actually gotten it where I want it. So there you go. You now, if you need seam guides and you need to be able to see what you're measuring, you can now do so. I'm pulling back and forth to make sure I don't have any pieces that are going to flip up, and I do not. I think she looks fine. And there you go. That looks much better. Or you can just go without and go Sun's seam guide measurements if you want. But if you need them, and many of you will as sewers, at least you have this now. You have a way to sort of tell, right? And you also have to position it, make sure it's, it's perfectly straight or as straight as you can get it. And that is an easy solution to a problem that, again, just when I thought, I had this thing all ready, there it was, an hour and 15 minutes of scraping like the Karate Kid, trying to get this tape off without damaging the surface. But anyway, when I had to do this, it occurred to me, I've talked about tools of the trade before, and I don't think I've ever talked about a guitar pick. But you never know. As I've mentioned, there are all kinds of tools you can use restoring sewing machines, and apparently a guitar pick is an excellent one depending on what you need to do. So, if any of you, again, any of my viewers know where you can get these little decals online, please share it there below because I haven't gone looking, but they do exist and they can be very useful. Someone realized that there was a need and created these for this purpose. Again, if you have newer machines or even some of the vintage machines like the 301, some of those Singers I showed you, they had them. And you may have a Japanese machine that has these embossed or colored in, and that's great. But there are a lot of machines that don't have anything. And I don't know what they were expecting the original owners and buyers to use. I really don't, unless it was the built-in seam guide that you could, again, screw into a threaded hole like here, and you could adjust it left or right. Right? You could create your own seam allowance. But sometimes, I don't know, if people didn't get the accessory or they lost it, over the generations, someone might not even know what the heck it was. In fact, I often have people ask me, what does this do? Well, it's designed to go in and help you figure out where your seams are going to be so you don't mess those up. So now that last little bit of a touch there might seem like a fine detail, but I believe it's an important one. And those of you who sew and need to know where your seam allowances are, I'm sure you particularly do. So if you have a vintage machine and you're trying to figure out how you're gonna keep up with your seam widths, there you go. There's one answer anyway. Some of you may have another. I don't have an original seam guide adjustment. I don't know if my Singers, I may have one from a Singer machine, but I don't know if it will fit. But again, this is, some of you might even prefer this little thing this little applique I just put on to a seam guide tool which bolts in, because those are a little more clunky, take up a little more space. But there you go. So you don't have to be a guitar player to use a guitar pick to help restore a vintage sewing machine. Who knew? I didn't until I went looking for something other than my thumbnail that I could use. So I hope this is helpful for some of you. Some of you may not be aware that these decals existed, and it can be a nice finishing touch to a vintage sewing machine, and that way none of your friends who have new sewing machines can say to you, well, there's no seam guide on your vintage machine. I appreciate all of you watching. Stay tuned for the next video. Bye now.